we are live. Welcome everybody once again to the second episode of the Designer's Boardchair. That's right, we made it to two. I know, I'm impressed myself. Today on the show, we have a pretty impressive guest, Scott Rogers, who has worked on a multitude of all kinds of different projects over the years. But for now, I welcome everybody to the Designer's Boardchair once again, the show where we talk about the wide-reaching world of game designers, how it's done, and the people who use and work with it. So, let us begin with a small little question to break things up. What have you been playing lately? Board games, video games, stuff like that.
Right. Well, first of all, thank you, Michael, for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be on your show and being the second guest. That's pretty great. I'm almost inaugural. As for what have I been playing, gosh, well, COVID has kind of it made it a little tricky for us board game players to get together. But I only recently have started to kind of emerge back into the world and start to play some board games. Now, I like all types of games, not just board games, but I'll talk about board games first. Mostly I've been playing prototypes. A friend of mine, a designer named Tate Wu, organizes a group out of Pasadena, which is relatively close to where I live in Los Angeles.
Ooh,
and so we go over to a really great store called Game Odyssey, and we play each other's prototypes. Tate has a pretty cool trick-taking game, I also have some prototypes that I hopefully will be bringing to Kickstarter, probably not this year, but maybe next year, I think.
Oh, I hope so.
So just getting those ship shape and making sure that they're fun and playable, and all the little edge cases have been sanded off of the game. You know how it goes.
Oh yeah.
But as far as games that I've been playing, like published games that I've been playing, let's see, what did I last play that was published? I don't know. I play a lot of games for research. I'm always working on lots of different games. So I've been playing a lot of worker placement type games, things like The Fall of Pompeii or Lords of Waterdeep, let's see, what are some other good ones that a friend of mine had never played Stone Age before, so we played that. So anyway, just kind of digging back through the catalog of games as I'm kind of doing some research on different genres. It's as a game designer, of course, it's super important to play as many games as you can, particularly if you're researching your own games. And I am a big believer in that. So I, more often than not, I'll play for fun, but usually I'll play with kind of a goal in mind. I want to find out more about how this works, or how did the manipulation of the pieces operate, or things like that. So I do a lot of research playing, but that's great. I love to play. I like doing the research. For me, of course, it's all fun and games.
Oh yeah, you can't really turn your brain off. You gotta think about what's happening while you're playing. But yeah,
absolutely.
You gotta.
Well, you get to a point as a game designer where you can't help but not turn your brain off, right? You're constantly thinking about, what are they doing here, and why is this working so well, and what can I take from it as lessons in order to make my designs more interesting and engaging.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You gotta, and as you said, you gotta play all of the games, watch all of the things, interact with all kind of media to get your inspiration and analysis from.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think of it as my process of creativity is like my brain is like a giant blender, like a Jamba Juice or something like this. And you're going to put all types of good stuff into that brain blender, and then you're going to mix it all up, and then hopefully what comes out is something delicious.
Absolutely. And that tends to work a bit better than trying to make something good when you have no frame of reference at all.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's any I say that writers, writers write and musicians play music, and game designers have to play games, right? You cannot be a game designer if you don't play games. It's just not, and that's
Yeah.
true for any type of game. But also, to be a well-rounded game designer, you should play all types of games, not just ones you like, but ones that maybe you're not as familiar with, or ones that you don't like. You can learn just as much, probably even more, from a game that you don't like
Yeah.
than a game that you like.
Especially if you're at a table with people that actually like the game.
Sure, yeah.
That's where you can get a lot of info. One of my weak spots there is social games where there's, not many rules. I'm not super big on those. I guess I'm a bit too much of a fan of mechanics at the moment.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting challenge to try to design a game that might be out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Often I will. So, for example, my family, I have two kids and a wife, and they're a little older. They're not little kids anymore or anything, but they really love very simple games like Uno, for
Oh
example.
yeah.
And Uno is fine. It's a perfectly fine game, but there's other things that I would rather play, things that
Oh
are a
yeah.
little more engaging, or have more narrative, or more parts and things like that. But I admire the purity of a game like Uno, but I am also somebody who wants to please the people that I live with, and so I have taken it on myself to try to create something like Uno, something that is simple but fast and easy to learn. And I've got a few ideas, and I've been playing with some designs, and we'll see if any of them are as good as Uno. I think Uno is a pretty fantastic game. It's stood the test of time. But for me, that's a challenge that I'm doing to myself. It's a game that admittedly, I'm like, well, it's not my favorite game, but I'm going to try to make a game because I know that there are people that like these types of games.
Oh yeah.
So, I am challenging myself. And so this is a good thing for any game designer to do. It doesn't matter whether you're new or experienced, to reach outside of your comfort zone and try to make something that you're not so familiar with, and like you said, I like your comment you said earlier, which is to pay attention to why other people like the game, because a good game designer, a professional game designer, can design games for audiences that they are just not a part of, or even ones that they might not even relate to. But if they pay attention and do their research and ask questions, then they can find out, okay, this is why people like these types of games. I can make this type of game.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, to take one of the games you mentioned earlier, like Waterdeep, for example, or one of these games you mentioned, what's something specific that you liked about the design of one of these games?
Well, game players crave a couple of things, and one of them is variety. And variety is, and with that comes surprise, because surprise is just variety that you're not expecting, right? And
Fair
so
enough.
there's lots of ways to get surprise into a game, and usually it takes the form of things like randomizers, decks of cards, or dice, or things like that.
Yeah.
But what I also like about the variety of Lords of Waterdeep is the idea that there's kind of a set pattern of options, so you can see all your options to begin with, and then you add variable options on the sides, those little buildings that get built by the players, and now that becomes new choices for the player. And so having that variety, and also the fact that they're random, they come out randomly, so when you play the game you might get a different configuration of those side buildings, right? Not counting the expansions with the corruption and all that
Yeah,
stuff.
all that,
Right,
extra stuff.
but that aspect that I can sit down and say, all right, I'm going to get a different experience this time because of the buildings, or maybe the person I'm playing with, or the other thing that I really like in the game are the little mission cards. Now, I find it very amusing that they've managed to kind of take something as thematic as Dungeons and Dragons and reduce it down to little colored cubes. You know, train an owl bear is 4 orange cubes, or go explore a dungeon is, you know, a purple cube and an orange cube and a white cube, right? So they've managed to take this very thematic and rich narrative aspect to the game and boil it down to a very almost abstract, you know, very much in the line of what a Euro type game, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
that's the magic of Euro games to you.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a thematic. It's a Euro game in a thematic clothing, right? Much like Dominion, or much like Blood Rage, or other games. Now these are called hybrid games now, right? They are games that have evolved over time. You know, since the Euro games kind of emerged in the '90s, and now designers of thematic games, such as myself, I prefer thematic games. Things that are
same here.
Yeah, story based, miniatures, randomness, things like that.
Oh yeah, give me a bucket of dice.
We're seeing this. We're taking some of the ideas from Euro games, things like cooperation, or no player elimination, or resource management, or hand management, things like that. Yeah. And we're seeing these put into the context of thematic games, which are, you know, fighting and rolling dice and you know, conflict and drama and things like that. And so we're getting this really nice blend. You know, this has already been going on for at least 10, 15 years now.
Oh yeah,
so it's
absolutely.
Nothing new.
Absolutely.
Right. But it's interesting because for myself, I'm older, and I have grown up with board games, and I have also, at least from an observer's point of view, been involved in. I've seen the evolution of gaming. When I first started playing games, they were things like very simple roll the dice, move your mice type games like Green Ghost or Voice of the Mummy, and then, you know, old classics like Monopoly and Mousetrap and Sorry and things like that.
Oh yeah.
But then when I was a teenager is when Dungeons and Dragons hit, and so I got into D&D, and I realized, oh hey, role playing and storytelling, and started to run. You know, I was just like every other game designer. I was a dungeon master, so I would learn how to craft stories and keep players happy. And then something happened when I was in high school, which might be one of the more significant things to happen to me during my career. And it was something that, you know, I didn't plan to happen, but I also loved board games, so I kind of wanted to be around them. And there was a game store in a local mall, and I got a job there. And as part of the job, my boss said, all right, every night I want you to take home a board game, and I want you to learn how to play it because you'll be able to sell it better. And I said, okay. Yeah, he was a very smart boss. And so I took home, you know, there weren't like hundreds of games back then. There were maybe dozens of games, right? But
like 5 by TSR, 2 by Steve Jackson, 1 by some
Sure, yeah. Well, this was, I mean, this is at the dawn of the thematic game. Right. So this is the Milton Bradley Game Master series. So Axis and Allies, Shogun, Broadsides and Boarding Parties, Fall of Rome, and I forget Fortress America. Right. And then it was also the same time we were getting the Games Workshop titles like Talisman and Chainsaw Warrior and Blood Bowl and games like that. So this is like really the dawn of the thematic, what some people call Ameritrash. I have no problem with the term because I think it's funny, but anyway, it's kind of the dawn of Ameritrash board gaming. What's that?
It's endearing, really.
Yeah. Well, I think as long as you understand that the term is always used kind of ironically, and it was never like people think, oh, it's so hateful and it's a insult, right? But it's not to the people that like these games. To them, it's funny. It's kind of like, you know, in the early 80s, there were like a lot of just kind of trashy movies, right? Like you go to the video store and there were all types of, you know, violent movies and war movies and sci-fi and horror and things like that. And they were just this like trash cinema and people. B-movies. Yeah, exactly. B movies, right? Those kind of movies. And so people who have a fondness for those genres tend to be the same people that have a fondness for the Ameritrash type games. And so we're used to kind of being self-deprecating, right? Because we know what the genres are. Zombie movies are not high art, not at least until, I don't know, has there been a high art zombie movie? I guess maybe Shaun of the Dead in a way, but maybe not. That's more just comedy. Anyway,
I've seen people trying to do it something, but yeah.
Right. They try to do it though. Right? Jim Jarmusch, I think, did one. I haven't seen it yet, but anyway, the point that I'm making is that those type of players embrace the playfulness and the irony. You know, that this is junk. You know, it is. Zombies movies are junk, and horror movies often are junk, and sci-fi movies are often junk. But that's okay. The comic books and action figures, and you know, like look at behind me, right? This is, you know, I've been a fan of this stuff for all my life. So for me, it didn't hurt my feelings when somebody called it. I just laughed about it, right? So I still use the term, even though I know I have a lot of friends that are they're very sensitive about it. But that's okay. They can, if they're sensitive about it, I just changed my language and I call them thematic games, which is another way to refer to them. But anyway, so we had thematic games, and then we had Euro games, or German. Originally, they were called German games because they were all kind of coming out of Germany.
Oh, yeah, right.
And then now we're in hybrids, right? Now everything mashes together, right? This always happens. This always happens, no matter whether it's fashion or theater or comic books or movies or music, you name it. You know, every genre goes through this same every entertainment genre goes through this same progression. It's just fashion, right? It's things change, and you have to be able to adapt to them, which is why going all the way back around is why you should always be playing games, because you got to know what the latest fashion is.
Oh yeah, I mean, honestly, it was inevitable that they were going to combine together at some point. Like, both sides had some really good strengths and some flaws to it, you know. Some people would say that the Ameritrash is too swingy and based on randomness and the choices don't matter, and some people would say that Euro games have themes about as interesting as staring at a wall and looking at the paint dry.
Right.
So
yeah, but fortunately now we have designers such as myself who are recognize the good in both.
Yeah, exactly.
And then there's lots of other. I mean, there's other genres that have kind of trickled their way in as well, right? We've got abstracts, and so now we're seeing games like Isle of Cats, which is essentially an abstract game, or even King Domino or Queen Domino.
Yeah,
those are abstract games, but they're giving a little bit of a veneer of theme, right? Like some storytelling or some flavor to them. Now, and I think there's ways you can go further with those, or you even have, what used to be Kriegspiel, the wargaming, right?
Oh, yeah.
The miniatures war games like H.G. Wells used to play back in the turn of the century, and that's Warhammer and the new Star Wars minis game and all that, right? That's a long tradition. That's a fascinating tradition of gaming.
Oh yeah, people still make hex and chit games.
Oh sure, yeah, they still play them, and I go to there's a local convention here in Los Angeles, and there's a whole room full of these guys that play these war games from the 70s that I remember seeing on the shelves. But myself, I'm not a big. I don't like the theme of war so much. Like I prefer fictional things than to historical. So so I see them and I appreciate them, and I smile at them with their tweezers picking up their chits and moving them around. But I kind of left that type of gaming behind many years ago.
Fair enough. Games are too long for me with hex and chit normally. I mean,
well,
it goes with the scope.
It's the simulation, though, right?
Yeah.
Like that, they are big. A lot of them are big history buffs, and so it's this big game of what if. What if Napoleon had lost Waterloo, or what if Patton, invaded North Africa in a different way, or something like that, right? And so part of their fun is the simulation, right? That we're trying to replicate reality in this very abstract way, chits and dice and maps and things like that. But then also it's the historical aspect, right? Knowing that history, that you talk to anyone who plays a lot of these games, and they're very informed about the history and psychology and all that, and it's fascinating from that perspective, because this is a neat side effect that sometimes games can have, where people can get very obsessed about the theme, and then it makes them go learn more about it, right? Look at Wingspan,
Oh yeah.
where you know, all the people that are starting to get into birding because of Elizabeth's game, right? They're interested in birds and the information on the cards, and they want to know more. And so there's no other games like that, so they turn back to the real world and look at birding associations and probably pick up books on birding. And I'm sure that there are several people that have become birder hobbyists thanks to that game.
Oh yeah, I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it for one bit. All right. So I really wanted to ask you a question because for a lot of the people that are gonna be and have been on this show, there are people who, you know, do game design stuff on the side, right? It's not enough to really make it a real job. But
Sure.
you on the other hand, have, you know, years of experience working with, you know, real studios with real offices. So this
Yeah.
question might not impact you as much or impact you more. And the question I had is, how do you balance your life, work, and personal projects?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's funny because even though I am a professional game designer, right? I have made my living for almost 30 years as a game designer, and I'm very proud of that. I mean, that's my hat's off to anybody that has worked in games for that long, because I know a lot of people that have also left the industry. It's not an easy profession
No.
to do. But that said, with board games, so I'm a by definition, I am also a professional tabletop game designer, because I have been paid and I have designs that I have been, I get royalties on games that I've created and things, all that good stuff. But I still call it my jobby, which is a job that's a hobby, or really
I
a
love
hobby
that
that's
term.
a job.
That's an amazing term.
Yeah, it's because my day job. Well, up until a few days ago,
Yeah.
actually, I was working for a startup, and they just went under. But it happens.
That,
That's the startup life.
that's
But
ALA in general, really.
well, yeah, I mean that's any startup in general, right? But I mean there are like I know a lot of game designers that have much more established or
Mm.
secure jobs. They
Oh yeah.
are teachers, or they work for maybe a government institution, or they run marketing departments at companies or whatever, right? Like game designers come from all walks of life. That's one of the really neat things that I like about it, is that
Yeah.
anybody can be a game designer, right? You just have to have a passion for games.
Really. Yeah.
Yeah, and so how do I balance working? Well, part of it is you have to make the time for it. So when I work on my board games, usually it's after hours. I get done with my job sometimes early, 5, 6 at night, sometimes a little later. But I part of it is I always carry. Let's see if I have. Yeah, I do. I carry around a notebook with me wherever I go,
Ah yes.
and this is I think we're on volume 46 of Scott's book of great ideas. Now you'll
Ah,
notice I started this one in March. It's I leave it blank. I don't know when it's going to end. Probably in June or somewhere. Usually takes about 3 or 4 months for me to fill one of these up.
yes.
Sometimes less if I'm on a tear and get a lot of ideas for things. But what I'll do is I'll start with just logging ideas and designs. As a matter of fact, here, I'll show you a couple of pictures from it, because I tend to draw. I'm a kind of a cartoonist by nature.
Ah.
And so what I'll do is, like, if I have an idea for a game, I'll do something like this, where I will draw out kind of like a blueprint
Oh
of
yeah,
the
that is.
game, like the board and the pieces I need and the tokens and the cards, and I'll write down kind of some general ideas about, like, what am I trying to do with this? Like
Yeah.
what am I hanging my idea on, right? You need to kind of have like a touchstone for your idea, right? So this is going to be a game about you're pickling pickles, you're growing cucumbers and making them into pickles, right? That's not what my game is, but that's just an
Aw.
idea. And so then you start thinking about, well, if I'm making a game about pickling pickles, what do I want to have in it, right? And so I start thinking about, well, maybe it'd be fun to have little pickle meeples, that you're moving from the farm to the vat to pickle them, or maybe there's little people that you can pickle the pickles with. So you put your people to pickle pickles. You could get into a real fun tongue twister thing, I guess, with that theme.
I
But
suppose
anyway,
so.
and then I go, well, do I want to have dice? Do I want to have cards? Do I want to have a drawback? Do I want to have, whatever, right? Like, are there interesting mechanisms that would work? Like, what would a game about pickling pickles need for gameplay? And so I kind of write all these notes down, and I kind of think about, I might need, I'm gonna have 4 players, and I need a scoring track, and I need pickles, and I need vats, and I blah 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 blah. I'll draw all this stuff out.
Mhm.
Then the next step, which is I also like this step, is that I start bringing the pieces together. And I have a pretty good collection now, because I've been doing this for a while, of parts. So I'll have, I have like blank cards and meeples and dice and draw bags and whatever, you name it, all
Oh yeah.
types of.
Oh
And
yeah.
then sometimes I might have to go, I don't have any pickle pieces. I need to either make pickle pieces or find pickle pieces to buy or something like that. So once in a while, I'll kind of splurge and I'll buy a fun something, like, let's say somebody Meeple Source makes pickle people or something. I don't know if they do or not, but I would
Maybe.
look at Meeple Source and go, do they have pickles? Yeah, and I'll buy 50 pickle pieces from them, right? So now I have my pickles. So now when I go to play test and I say this game is about pickling pickles, then they can, like, the players will go, oh yeah, here's the pickle, and here's the pickle vat that you've drawn, and here's the little people that are pickling the pickles that are meeples or whatever, or
Right.
standees, minis, I don't know, pawns.
Yeah.
And anyway, so it gets the players in mood, right? Because I find that um, even though, so I have a lot of friends that are game designers that say, well, you don't really need much for a prototype. You just need index cards with handwriting and
Yeah,
all
I've
that.
heard that one
And
so
sure,
many times.
yeah, and that's fine. That's their choice, but I have 2 things going for me. One is I can draw, so I can communicate visually, and I could draw pickle tokens if I wanted to, or stuff like that, right? So it's no big deal for me. It doesn't take very long. I'm pretty fast with this kind of stuff.
Right.
But the second thing is that I personally think it's important to, when I'm playtesting, I want to figure out what is wrong with the game as soon as possible. I
That's
want the
fair.
players to go, this doesn't work, or this doesn't make sense, or whatever. And the more things that I can have that communicate the ideas that I'm trying to get across, the less they're going to worry about, well, wait, what is this thing? Is that a pickle? I don't know. Is it a person? If they don't worry about those kind of fiddly details, then they can just start looking at the gameplay. And
Yeah.
then they can give me the feedback that I need, because that's what's going to help me improve, is that iterative, play the game, get the feedback, improve on the feedback, and keep going, because that's at the heart of game design. Iteration is the heart of game design. You got to build it so you have it, and then you got to just play it and play it and play it and break it, play it and break it, play it and break it. And then as you go, you got to be smart enough to go, this bit of feedback that person gave me, maybe I don't need to listen to, or it doesn't really fit what I'm trying to do. But
Yeah.
these 3 people said the same thing over and over again. That's a problem. I've got to fix it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That is it. That's the part of the game design that I think a lot of people. I think that what separates people from becoming game designers. It's the fact you gotta go out, talk to people, and just convince them to play your game 1,500
Well,
times. And
it's
then
it's tough, right? Because I mean, I'm like I said, I've been doing this for a while, and even I'm like a little, I don't know if embarrassed is the right word, but like I'm a little shy sometimes about asking people to play my game. I'm like, do you want to play my game? And usually people are pretty friendly and yeah, sure, we'll try it. But then, like you said, you've got to find a group of friends or somebody to play it over and over again, right? And after a
Yeah.
while, they're like, well, I've already played this. Unless you do some sort of significant change, you're kind of like, well, I don't want to waste their time, having them play the same thing over and over again. But then there's some people that are more than happy to. And this is another secret that I have, which is you want to talk to, if you have friends that are game designers, you want to get them to look at your game first, because they'll get you to the point where you can solve problems quickly. And they usually have the language to be able to help you improve your game quickly, because that's the goal, right? You want to just get from broken to working as fast as possible, because once you get it working, then you can start figuring out other problems, issues, edge cases, things like that. But until you get that engine, as it were, running, you're going to be stuck, right? And you're not going to have a game that works, and that's no good, right? You might, and it might never work. You might actually make a game that just the way that you put the pieces together don't work so great together, or the theme is weird, or whatever. And I have just like everybody else, I have a stack of games that just probably will never get made, because
it's the pile of shame. It is what it is. Also known as the
well, it's not shame. It's not shame per se. It's just you're learning from it, right? Even if you make garbage, you're still learning from. As long as you can learn from that process about what went wrong and what didn't work and why people didn't like it, or why it wasn't that appealing, then you kind of go, okay, I get. Like, I have a game that I really like that's a cowboy game, and in it, you kind of collect these cards, and there's all these gunslingers that come to town, and you have you get dice by depending on the cards you play, and then at the end of the round, like when the little cowboys face off on the street, you roll the dice, and you have a shootout. And
makes sense.
And people like the way it looks, and they when I tell them about the game, they get very excited about it. And I play tested this game a lot, and I showed it to publishers, but they all said no, thank you, no, thank you, no, thank you. And I would ask them, okay, what do you not like about it? And some of the feedback was not helpful. Like, somebody once said, "Oh, nobody likes Western games." I'm like, I don't believe that. I mean, I have Western Legends.
I call bullshit on that one.
Yeah, exactly. I did. I laughed in his face and said, "No, I don't think that's the case." But I did have other people give me more useful feedback. They would say, "Well, there's just too much randomness between the cards and the dice, and I didn't feel like I had a lot of control over what was going on." And so I would listen and go, "Okay, all right, let me see what I can do." And I would redesign. But it's still, I think, the basic nature of the game, using the dice for the shootout, just people responded poorly to that. And the game was a little too complex to be kind of a mass market game, but it wasn't, it didn't have enough dice mitigation in it for a hobby gamer, right? And that's the other thing, is you got to know who your game is for. You got to realize that your game is like for either a mass market audience, which means not a lot of rules and only takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play, and you should be able to play it with the whole family, or at least, most of the family, versus a hobby game, which are, board game nerds like us, right? Guys that don't mind spending, 2, 3, 4 hours, 8 hours if you're a Twilight Imperium fan, right? Yeah, so you got to know your audience, right? That's a big part of it. But also, you have to be willing to. So that game, sits in a box, a very nice looking box, but it's on my shelf, and I don't think it will ever come back, at least in the form that it lives in that box, right? I think there's some ideas in there that I think are still salvageable and worthwhile, and I'm kind of essentially making a new version of it, but with a lot of big changes to it. And so, for me, it was a learning experience. I poured a lot of effort and time and love into it, but sometimes your babies don't grow up to be very pretty. So you just gotta say, all right, you go live over here on this shelf, and we'll see if we can make another brother, the sister, whatever, that is a little more appealing to the audience.
Yeah, stay in the shed. If the brother needs a heart transplant, we'll call you.
Right. Yeah, if I need to salvage the dice or the miniatures from that other game, I'll do that. But yeah, for the most part, it goes away, right? And it's a little heartbreaking, but trust me when I say that every game designer who has ever been published also has a stack of games that has never been published.
Absolutely.
It's just,
the
way it is.
I've never been published, and I've got a bag of these things. Although I think to call them it's like I call them recyclables. Just a bunch of ideas.
Right.
New project. Let's see what we got here. This could fit. We'll see if that works.
Right. You gotta be willing to kill your darlings, as it were, and realize. I mean, that's the hardest thing for a lot of people, is when to call it quits, right?
Oh yeah, you gotta go back to the drawing board and just This is not
Yeah, you
going
got to just
nowhere.
be honest with yourself and realize that, hey, this thing isn't working the way that I want it to, and nobody's interested in it. So let's move on and make something that maybe people will be more interested in.
Yeah,
And that,
that's something I learned really quickly when I started, because as I told you a bit before we started the show, I mainly started game design on trading cards. And when
mhm,
it comes to making trading card games, especially in the concept of a set that's meant to be played together, uh, it's gonna happen very frequently that you're gonna make this card, you're really gonna like it, and everybody else will immediately point out how flawed it is. So you make some tweaks, still inherently flawed, and at some point you're gonna be like, all right, let's go back to the drawing board, Control A, delete, let's start again. And you
right.
got to do that a lot. And I've done this multiple times, especially since now I'm working on a actual published card game in virtual reality called Cards and Tankers. I had to do that many times with card designs that either couldn't really be done in a video game or just weren't very good, and you couldn't really tweak to make it any better because the concept itself was hot garbage.
Well, I think you bring up another really good point, which is making something that is more geared for the medium in which you're designing it for.
Yeah.
So, there are a lot of I have been making video games since the '90s, right? Since the Sega Genesis days. So I love
Nice.
video games. I'm sorry.
I just said nice. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Go on.
And so I love video games, but I personally believe that I much prefer my board game experiences to be analog. I don't want
Yeah.
an app for my board games. I don't want something that I've got to use that is an electronic device, unless it's built into the game itself, um, as part of my game. And I could make the app. I could make a game that there are some lovely games out there. Things
Oh yeah.
like
Escape from Planet
what's the
X.
murder? Yeah, or what's the murder mystery game that has like the VR thing in it?
I have not heard of that
Chronicles of
one.
Crime.
Oh.
Yeah, Chronicles of Crime has like a big AR component to it, and or the World of Yoho, which I don't think really made a big splash, but anyway, there are the XCOM game. Anyway, there are a lot of these games that use technology to help play the game, and they're particularly useful for like solo play and things like that. But
Hmm.
for me, the appeal of board games is the physicality of it.
Oh yeah.
I like
Absolutely.
little bits. I like rolling dice. I like placing tiles. I like handling
Thank
cards
you.
and moving miniatures. And to me, that little world that you can create in front of you, like Carcassonne, man, such a great
Oh
feeling to
yeah.
see the world build in front of you. This little tiny village, right,
That
with
one
your
works.
little meeples.
That one works with everybody. That game. Kids,
Yeah,
teens,
yeah,
D&D nerds want to take a picture of it and use it in their next
yeah.
games.
Because it's fun to have that feeling, right? That's one of the reasons why people love miniature games so much, right?
Oh
Warhammer
yeah.
and Star Wars Legions and Blood Bowl and whatever. All there's a million of those out there as well. Or like all those Simon games, right? That have a bazillion miniatures with them, because we like that feeling of, it's not just the kind of the beauty of the all the fun little things there, and we're kind of looming over it like God or something, but it is also that I'm in control. We often have no, and if the last 2 years have been any indication of this, we have very little control in our lives, right?
Yeah.
Like things can happen that all of a sudden we're spending all of our time away from other humans and indoors and all that, and so how many things do you get control of in your life, other than like, what do you want to have for lunch? And even that, sometimes you might not be able to get what you want for lunch, right?
No.
So I think that board games, one of the big appeals of it is that it gives us a feeling of control, right? It gives us a feeling that there's this world out there that exists in this other realm, this realm of the imagination, of what is called the magic circle, right? If you know your game theory stuff,
Yes.
or not game theory, but your psychology.
Yeah.
But anyway, we want to live in that world, right? That's also why World of Warcraft and all those other, Genshin Impact and all those other MMOs are so popular. Is it's like we're in this this world that is much more friendly and much more rewarding, and it tells us when we do a good job. I mean, Michael, has anybody told you you've done a good job with something today?
No, not really.
No.
But hey,
well, I think you're doing a good job asking questions. So congratulations.
Thank you.
You're doing a good job. Consider yourself patted on the back. But I mean, we don't get this very often, right? We don't get this validation very often, but board games and video games do. Yep. And that's a really important thing to realize, is that we crave that validation, because, like, you know, I don't think I've been told on a regular basis good job about anything since I was like 8 years old, right? Like since grade school or something.
Yeah.
So it's important for us as game designers to realize that, and to build in scenarios and situations and events that allow the player to experience that, right? Because we want the player to keep playing, and what's a great way to keep somebody to do something is to make them feel good about it.
Yeah, it's got
positive reinforcement.
Got to reward them.
Yes, right, exactly. Rewards, positive reinforcement, progression, all these tools. We have so many tools as a game designer in our utility belt of trick, right? and so the more you play games, and the more you talk to people about what they like, and the more you listen to podcasts like this, the more tricks you're going to pick up, and you'll become a more powerful game designer.
Exactly. You can pick them up from so many different places. That's what's so nice. As long as you keep a mind open, it's just easy to get.
Well, and as long as you don't use them for evil, right? Like there are a few things going on around right now that you know, I don't agree with ethically. You know, and it's kind of it's been a while. It's seeped its way into particularly the video game world for a while now.
Oh yeah.
But as a game designer, I can make a choice and go, you know what? I don't want to make that. I don't need to contribute to that. Other people can make it. That's fine. If they make a living at it, good for them. But that's not how I want to make my living. That's not those are not the things I want to put out into the world.
I mean, even 50 years ago, you know, slot machines had to be designed by someone. So. But
sure. Well, they still are to this day.
Yeah.
To this day, they're really, you know, there are very good companies and very well-established companies that are making. I don't know if you get to casinos at all, but
there's none here. But I've seen them. These machines are like sights and sound fountains. Just all of the things.
I mean, they're like video games in a way, right? Yeah. I remember the last time I was in Vegas, maybe I saw like, you know, themed slot machines, right? Like the Wizard of Oz and Batman and Star Wars, and you know, all the things that have been turned into board games and video games. Now they're slot machines, and it's because, you know, people love these IP, and they want to just kind of experience those sights and sounds, and they're kind of charmed by them.
Exactly.
And they're willing to put a few dollars in, and you know, I mean, statistically, if you know anything about gaming, you know that slots are the absolute worst thing. They're
pinball machines for people who have no skill.
Right. I would much rather play pinball than a slot machine myself.
Oh yeah.
At least I kind of feel like if I succeed, it's off of my own skill rather than just you know, random happenstance.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's again, you know, these things exist and they're profitable and people make them, and good for them. You know, it's just not the type of thing that I want to make. I want to make other things that tell stories and make people feel good about themselves. Maybe they learn something. Maybe they, you know, it helps them remember something that they like, or, you know, whatever. There's lots of reasons to do things. I say do them for the right reasons. Do them for the reasons that are important to you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, I actually wanted to ask you a question because I was really curious about that one. So, before the show started, you sent me your LinkedIn and your not Gamefish, but something like that.
Yeah, my Moby Games.
Moby Games, yeah. Profile and stuff like that. And specifically on your Moby Games, a lot of the projects you worked on was as a creative manager. And that's a title I actually haven't heard much or at all really in the past. So I was wondering if you could, you know, enlighten us as to what is a creative manager.
Well, one of the good news is you don't have to be a game designer to work creatively in games. So I was fortunate enough to work for a publisher named THQ, who unfortunately is no longer around.
Still sad about that.
But yeah, but at the time they were a pretty big company, and they made a lot of games. A lot of games, a lot of them for like younger kids, you know, like kind of grade school age and all that. And so I was part of the group that made games for that age group. So I worked on, and remember earlier I was telling you about working on games that you might not have a personal interest in, but if you're a professional, you still can work on them and make good things.
Yeah.
And for me, that a lot of these kid games were like that. Like I'm not an 8-year-old girl. I don't care about Bratz or things like that, right? Remember those dolls with the weird heads?
Yeah.
But because I am a professional, I was able to work on games like that and make good games, you know. And years later, I've met women who said, "Hey, this was like one of my first video games, and I loved it and played it all the time." And to me, that made me so happy because that was my goal. My goal was to make something that audience would love. And so a lot of the games that I worked on in that capacity was as a creative manager. And what that means is that I would work with the development teams who were making the games. And they were all over the world. They were in Japan and Australia and Canada and all over the US and Europe. And so I got to travel all over the world, which was fantastic. And I would meet with these creative teams, and we would look at what they're working on. And sometimes it was from the very beginning. They didn't have a game at all, and I helped them come up with game ideas. Sometimes they already had something started, and I would look at them and help them make their games better. And so what I was doing is leveraging my knowledge of games and all the games that I had played and all the kind of tricks, you know, the game designer tricks, and helping them improve. And the people that I worked with was a wide variety of experience. I worked with, you know, teams that were very young and inexperienced, and teams that had been making games for years. And I would, you know, my first job as a creative manager is I had to prove to them that I wasn't a bad guy, because when the publisher sends somebody to your office, immediately you assume it's like Darth Vader showing up at the Death Star saying, "Hey, you better get this Death Star built, otherwise the Emperor is going to come and take care of you."
Yeah, you know, it's the Inquisition coming in, like, hey.
Right. Yeah. Excuse me. So I had to do it. First, I had to be diplomatic enough to be able to go, "Look, guys, I'm on your side. I'm here to help you make the best game you can make." So that was step one. And so that usually took anywhere from a meeting to several weeks to some cases never, right? Like some people never trust you, right? But whatever, it's all part of the job. You can't let that hurt your feelings.
Nope.
Then and then at that point, I would look at what they'd created at that point, if they had anything created, and I'd ask them a lot of questions. What do you want to do with this? What's your intentions? How are you going to do it? What technology are you using? What, you know, who are your? Let me talk to your artists and your programmers and your designers and you know and again, it was a challenge sometimes, because sometimes the teams didn't want me talking to them because they were worried that I would influence them in some way that they didn't want them influenced, which is a little weird.
Corrupt them.
Yeah, well, you know, it's people get very territorial and very protective, and I understand.
I mean, yeah, you can't help but get attached to something you spend like two years of your life on sometimes.
Right. But the one thing that I always had in my favor was that I was working for the guy who was giving them the money, and so, you know, if worse came to worse, I'd be like, look, you know, the people that are hiring you would like you to make this better, or do this, or you really should have this in your game, or you really can't have this in your game, or whatever. Right. So I was working as kind of this advocate for both the publisher, but also trying to do the best help for the developer as well. So it was a very interesting position. It was very challenging, and it was very busy. I mean, at the height of when I was working there, I think I managed 16 separate games at once.
Oh, goodness
so I had to know what was going. Yeah, it's insane, right? And so I had to know what was going on with all of the games and the people involved, and reach out to them on a regular basis and play their builds so I could see where there was improvement happening. And it was exhausting. It was exciting. It was nerve-wracking. It was creatively satisfying. It could be very frustrating, but it had all types of good and bad things, just like any other job, right? Like any any job, no matter what it is, whether it's game design or you're a banker, it's they all they're all the same. There's always something great about it, and there's always something terrible about
Oh yeah.
it. So that's just the way things go, right? So you got to be willing to accept that as a creative profession.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's a pretty interesting job, I gotta say. It's not exactly something you hear a lot. I mean, I've heard stories of, managers and, producers and stuff, kind of,
Right.
mainly in like an antagonist sense with the developers, like on the same side as the publisher, pushing them to go faster and faster
Well, that
and
was
faster.
that was an interesting thing though, because I had worked up to that point. I had worked for about, oh gosh, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years as a developer.
Mm,
So going into the position, I was like what you just said. I was like, those damn publishers, they're always, causing trouble and stirring things up, and
yeah,
why aren't they paying us, and blah blah blah. And so it was I initially thought of them from a developer's perspective.
yeah,
But when I became a publisher, I realized why those decisions were being made, because I was seeing what was going on, and I was having conversations about things that the team didn't know about, that we were having to deal with. And it could have been licensing, it could have been funding, it could have been whatever.
yeah. You gotta
There's
peek behind the
multiple
curtain.
directions. Yeah, yeah. So when I went back to the developers as the creative director, I'm like, look, guys, I've been where you're at. I've been in your shoes. I know why you hate the publisher so much, or whatever, right? Why you have this antagonistic mindset.
Yeah,
But I'm here to tell you that no, it's not all that you think it is. I tell them as much as I could, right? There's obviously some things you
yeah,
have to kind of keep under your hat. But I think that was one of the reasons why I ended up being successful in that job, was I was seeing it from both perspectives. And by the time I was kind of done with that job in, I think it was like 2011, I would tell people, I'd say, I think that people in the video game industry should be like run like the Israeli army, which is you should work as both an officer and an infantryman, right? You should both make games, and then you should run in work for the publisher, because that's going to give you a broader understanding of both positions and both perspectives, and it's going to make you a better employee, no matter who you work for in the future.
yeah. And in all fairness, it sounds like they could have used a couple more creative managers if you were doing so many projects at once.
Well, we
Sheesh.
had a fair amount of them, but we just had so many games going on that
Oh
I
yeah,
think everybody had kind of a heavy load by that point.
THQ was pumping them out back in the day.
Yes,
That,
yeah. They were cranking them out, and we were dealing with so many different platforms, right? Game Boy and
yeah.
Xbox and PlayStation and computer and
Oh yeah.
even cell phone and things like that, right? So
Yeah, I mean they were so
yeah,
plentiful. I think like a quarter of the GBA games I had back then were like by THQ.
and I probably worked on at least a few of them.
I think so. That's one of the realizations I had earlier when you were talking about, like, holy shit, this might be this might have some more length than I thought.
Yeah, it was funny. It was funny. There was a post on Twitter, and people were kind of talking about what is a great game that you think nobody else knows about or appreciates,
Yeah, hidden gems.
and like a eighth of the things that people were listing were like THQ games, and at least four of them were ones that I worked on. And so I would post under it. I'd go, hey, I worked on this, and they're like, what? I love this game. I played it all the time.
Yeah.
And, it's my favorite GBA or my first GBA game or whatever. So,
I mean, with the quantity, it's bound to happen.
yep.
A
Yeah.
lot of
Well, every game is somebody's first game, right?
exactly, especially back then when you're a kid, you don't have as many, I guess you could say, standards, so it's
Yep.
a lot more impressive.
Well, you're like, I just want to play all the games, right? When you're a
Yeah.
kid, you're like, I'm just hungry I just want to play everything.
Exactly. That's why when I was a kid, I was far enough into the 2000s for emulation to be a
Yeah.
thing. So I did a lot of that on PC, but back then you couldn't really do emulation on handhelds.
Right.
So at
Oh
least
man,
I
emulators
had that.
were when that kicked in, that was like, oh my gosh, all these games I haven't played in forever. I mean,
Oh,
I
yeah.
remember playing a lot of them on arcade cabinets.
Oh yeah. And now arcade machines can fit anything.
Oh, I
And
know. I wish I had the room in my house. I would definitely get one.
oh yeah, that's a lot of people have those. It's amazing to think how far we've gone. Now you can have
Yeah.
like these things, portable handhelds that can play like PS1, GameCube games without too much issue for
Oh,
under a
what I
hundred
what I
bucks.
what I find even more amazing is how easy it is now to make video games.
Oh yeah,
Like when I started, you needed, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. You needed huge teams. You needed programmers and artists, and you needed to know how to code. You
yeah,
needed to know how to whatever. And now, like if you go onto Unity and download a few mods, like they have a 2D game development system, right? And you can
yeah.
make your own 2D game or your own 3D game, or you go to the asset store and there's all these different things that you can take to make your game. Or if you
Exactly.
need to write some code, you can download the code. Or if you need to write it yourself, the C Sharp now helps walk you through it. I mean, it's amazing. And I'm but what's so great is it's encouraging so many people to make games,
Oh yeah,
because the more people make games, the more it's just get everybody should be able to play, right? Regardless of their gender, their ethnicity, their financial background. Games is and has been a kind of a great equalizer, right? They've been around for thousands of years, whether it's all the way back in the ancient times where you would play the game of or Menon or Senate or things like that,
yeah. A nice
or
old game of Nine Men's Morris.
yeah, sure. Like, I mean, to me, that's amazing. Is that you can still play a game that was from the dawn of man, right? Like that is something that you can say, all right, let's bust this out and let's play it.
Yeah,
Now there's been several that have been kind of lost to time, and we don't know the rules, and we just kind of guess what the rules could be. But
yeah.
but that's pretty amazing, right? That I could have I can have Backgammon, which is a 5,000-year-old game,
Oh yeah.
sit on my shelf next to Gloomhaven, which is a 4-year-old game.
I think
Yeah,
so. Yeah.
yeah. So
That, yeah, that is absolutely great, especially since I've done a lot of research recently on historical board games for the abstract games I was working on because I wanted to make something of a similar vibe so that it could be played at LARP events, live action role playing in a medieval
sure, yeah.
setting, so it would fit. This is super fun research to do. I honestly, I kind of encourage people to do some research and do these really, really old games. The more simple they
Yeah.
are, the more interesting it is to analyze how they work. Because it
Yeah.
doesn't take a lot to completely change how a game feels when it's that simple.
Well, and there's also a reason why those games have stuck around so long. It's
Oh
because
yeah,
they are simple and they are
exactly.
fun and they are, and to even to a certain extent, they have become part of our language. Think of how chess is not just a game; it is the symbols and the ideas
Oh
and
yeah,
the or playing cards, right? Like the imagery from the playing cards has it's taken on a life of its own, and
oh yeah.
the real question is, will anything from today have that power, right?
I
Like what is the thing that's going to live in the future 100 years from now? Will people play Uno, or will they be playing Lords of Waterdeep or whatever, right? Like
mm,
you know it's a fascinating to me.
oh yeah. If Hasbro is still around, I have no doubt they will still be pumping out random variations of 100 years in the future.
Right, in Monopoly and all those other Clue and all that, right?
Oh yeah, you'll be able to go to Walmart and buy a Monopoly that's projected by hologram into your living room.
Yeah, that's the Walmart on Mars that you're going to.
Mayhaps. Uh, so I wanted to ask you another question because you've done a lot of published work and all that professional stuff, and I highly doubt I'm gonna get the chance to interview that many qualified people in the future. Or at least in that sense, if you get what I mean. Uh, I wanted to know what is it like to work in the games industry, especially the games industry is relatively publicized now, but the board game industry, I think, still has some amount of mystique to it. Like, I don't think a lot of people knows, like, I still see tons of people asking, like, what's it like to work at Steve Jackson Games or Wizards of the Coast and stuff like that. That's not as much the case for video games.
Well, it's not too dissimilar, to be honest. Like from a structural perspective. Now, granted, I've never worked in an office of a board game publisher.
Yeah.
I've all of the jobs that I've done are contract licensed games. So I'll make a game that I license to the publisher, and then they publish it. But I have been in actually, I've been in the offices of two of the three publishers that have published my games, and they're no different than a video game office. You know, they're cubicles or desks, and people have, you know, toys and posters and games, stacks of games, and you know, games that they are gonna play, and prototypes that people have submitted, and they, you know, more often than not, they, you know, will set aside some time to play these games, which is, to me, seems like one of the cooler parts of working in the board game industry, right? Is you're like, hey, we got to play these games, you know, so let's play some games.
Yeah.
But that's not really different than video games either. You know, video games is the same way. You've got to play the games to be able to find, you know, like I said, it's an iterative process. So you want to play them, find the problems, fix it, keep going. And so I think the thing that people might find surprising about board game industry is it's a lot smaller in terms of scale for most of the companies.
Yeah, that
so
makes sense.
There are exceptions: Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro and Mattel and you know, the big mass market companies. But I think that most of the publishers, at least the hobby game publishers, and some of the mass market as well, are really just only a few people that then contract a lot of work out. So, you know, I know that a company like Leader Games, which is the guys that do Root and all that, Vast and all those games, they're only a few guys. You know, they're only a few people making, and everything else is kind of outsourced and all that. So you know, you go there and you see these beautifully produced, you know, games. And you think, oh, there must be a whole team of people. And you look on the credits, and there's a bunch of people in there. But those are all people that are either, you know, part-time, or they contract, or they're friends, or whatever, right? Like, so the majority of these companies are really not huge. They're not big companies per se in the way that we think of big companies. Not in the way that, like, we think of video game developers, which often can be, you know, like I remember hearing about teams at Squaresoft, and there were like thousands of people working, or Blizzard or Activision or whatever. Those are massive teams, right? Of an army, little army of creators making these games. But board games are just not. It's still such a small industry, at least other than, I mean, Hasbro and Mattel and all that are still big, and they have, and Funko, and they still have like a fair amount of people working for them. But I'd be surprised if it were more than 50, 60 people. You know? And that's considered really big, right? Is that scale.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, board games, you don't need as many people to make one board games. You need a couple of designers, maybe, a couple of artists, and then a lot of play tests, and the rest is mainly handled by like advertising and factories somewhere.
Well, if you even have that, right? Like, not everybody has access. Like, some people, the only advertising they have is Kickstarter and social media, right?
Well, I'm talking about, you know, publishers, right?
Yeah. No, I know. Well, the other thing though that's a real challenge, I think, for the board game industry is that we don't have, well, even the video game industry doesn't have the venues that they used to have to advertise.
Yeah.
Think of the golden age of video games, right? Where, you know, Genesis, SNES days, where you had magazines, you had TV commercials, you had newspapers, you had, you know, then the internet would start to, you know, in the 90s, the internet started to come around.
Yeah, you also had a lot more events, right? There wasn't just like...
Yeah, events and stores too, right? There were more, you know, in person, like Toys R Us and I don't know about you, but GameStops are starting to dry up around here.
Yeah, well,
you know, so so there was a lot of places you could advertise and let people know about a game. Now with board games, it's like there's a handful of magazines. Like there's like Tabletop Gaming and Senate, and I think maybe Game Informer runs some articles once in a blue moon.
Maybe, and then
And then
after that you get like indie zines on itch.io and places like
right,
that.
right, and yeah, if people even can find those, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got like ads on Board Game Geek
Yeah.
and and maybe a YouTube video, but then there's Kickstarter, and that's it, man. Like it's tough.
Oh
It's
yeah.
the whole landscape has changed,
It's
and
almost
not
entirely
necessarily for the
word of
better.
mouth.
Yeah, yeah. Word of mouth is huge, right?
It's word of
So
mouth
it's
and
up to the
influencers, really.
yeah, it's up to the creators to reach out to influencers such as yourself, or to just posting. Like I just the other day I was working on a design, and I'm like, hey, I need to let people know about this. So I put up a picture and said, hey, there's a thing I'm working on, and if it gets some people to go, hey, what's that? And then I can start, spreading the word, right? And saying,
Yeah.
hey, I'm working on this thing, and hopefully it'll be cool, and keep posted. And you just got to learn how to work the social media, right? Because even though I know a lot of people are like, I don't like what's going on with Twitter and all that, and I'm going to leave Twitter, and that sucks too, because now it's like there's one less thing. If people leave Twitter, that's one less way to spread the word, right? So
Yeah.
now it's just down to Instagram and Facebook and maybe LinkedIn, and what else? Like Discord,
YouTube.
it's hard to find stuff. YouTube, it's hard to find stuff.
Yeah.
So
It is
anyway,
it is a bit of a difficulty. I do think, having done a little bit of like work, having been hired for a little bit as a publicist, it is really hard to get people to notice your stuff when you have
oh yeah, yeah,
little to no
absolutely.
budget and even less knowledge on how this stuff works. It feels like you're shouting at a brick wall most of the time.
Yeah, I describe the internet as billions of people all shouting, "Look at me!"
Yep,
Right?
yep,
Nobody,
yep.
nobody is looking out. Everybody wants people to look in, right?
Yeah, exactly. Dead
Yeah,
on the money.
it's tough. It's very tough.
It
So I
is
think that
not
this
easy.
is the one thing though that I think the board game industry does have in its favor, and that is the community itself is for the most part a pretty generous and welcoming community, and
Yeah,
they are happy to share and they're happy to spread the word. Now, granted, they're just as happy to complain about something, right?
that's always the
But
case.
yeah, that's always the case. That's human nature. So there have been lots of moments where maybe I'm working on something and people go, "Hey, I played your game and I really liked it. I'm going to post something online," and I go, "Great, get that up there. That helps me a lot, right?"
Mm.
And that's really one of the things that if you like a game and if you like a creator, boost that signal, man. Post a positive review on Amazon. Put something up on Board Game Geek, like put a positive review. This is definitely good word of mouth is one of the best gifts you can give your favorite game creators.
Hmm. Absolutely. Especially because even if you can manage to round up some friends to do playtesting, once you release something as an indie creator, it's can be really, really difficult to get any sort of feedback whatsoever.
Yeah,
Like you
yeah,
can't
yeah.
follow up on something if you have no idea what's the opinion or if there even is an opinion.
Right.
That
Yep, absolutely. It's not easy. I had a boss, one of my first bosses in video games used to say that video games is a hard business. And when I was a kid, I would just laugh, old man. But now that I'm older and I've gone through it and seen it from many different angles, he was right. It's hard. It's hard to
yeah,
the business of fun is a hard business,
yep,
but it's also a very rewarding business. And
exactly.
to be honest, I don't think I'd want to do anything else.
Absolutely, and I'm so happy for you that you managed to have such a big and prolific career that is still going on as well.
Yeah, yeah. Knock on wood, it's still going.
Yeah, yeah, it's not something that everybody can get the chance of doing. I don't think.
Well, if you want it bad enough, you'll get it. You know, I firmly believe that. I think
Mm,
that anything is possible. You just have to want it.
that's fair. That's fair. And actually, going with that, I also wanted to ask you a question that's a bit more for I think everybody else and also me, uh, and that is, after all this experience and these years of work, what are some things that you'd like to say to these indie designers and people that are starting out on their journey?
Just keep making games. Game designers make games, and if you want to if you make a game, you are a game designer. Now, if you want to be a professional game designer, then you have to sell it, and sometimes that's a totally different set of skills.
Yeah.
So try to get as good of selling yourself as well as selling your game. But if you if you're not that good at that, if you don't think you're that good at it, partner up with somebody who can help you. Right? It's okay to ask for help.
Oh yeah, nobody is a mountain.
No, and of course, particularly with game designers, you need people to play your games. So you need to make friends, and you need to be a nice person because you need the help of those people. And so, don't, be kind, be generous, and help others as much as you need the help. I love going to these playtest events, and often I'll just go without anything. I won't bring a game of mine because I just want to go there and try to help the other people. So I think it's a good practice for game designers to get in the habit of trying to help as much as they need the help.
Yeah, you can't really be selfish in the especially
No,
the
you
board
need
game
other people to
industry.
play board games, right? If you have no one to play board games with, you're not going to be able to play your game.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even if you make solo games, you can't do it alone.
Right, yeah. Well, then you're just going to be playing it by yourself. And,
Yeah. All right. I mean, that's just how it goes. So, next thing I wanted to talk about, so you recently, as you've said before, your recent job has now worked out in the end. I can understand that. I mean, one of my recent things, I almost got hired for a startup, which ended up closing down before they even got the time to finish reading my resume. So these things can be a bit chaotic. So I wanted to know what's in the what do you want to do next, as it were, right? Like, do you have any plans now that this recent thing has fallen through? If it
yeah.
isn't too
Well, I
personal.
mean, I'm in a nice position for the moment where I can take contract jobs, so I don't need to have a full time gig. The big concern when you have a family often is health insurance.
Yeah.
And fortunately, my wife, her job allows us to have health insurance, so
Mm.
I can rely on her for that for now. And then I'll bring in money and little bits here and there, maybe doing some contract work or teaching gigs or whatever. There's always lots of opportunities. But what it gives me is time to work on more board game designs because my personal goal is to go to Gen Con this year with 3 prototypes that have been play tested and I'm looking to sell to
Oh, that's a
publishers.
nice goal.
So as I get closer to the show, I'll reach out to publishers and say, "Hey there, I have these 3 games and I would love to talk to you about them. Let's take a meeting," right? And then you do a pitch, and that's a whole process into
Oh
itself.
yeah.
But the other thing is that I have already in the past I've published a couple of books on game design. One is called Level Up: The Guide to Great Video Game Design, and the other is called Swipe This: The Guide to Great Touchscreen Game Design.
Ooh, that's
And
an
those have
important
been
one.
out for yeah, those have both been out for many years, and they're on Amazon. Check them out. I think they're both good books.
Oh yeah.
But I've also been the publisher of those books reached back out to me and said, "Hey, we would really love for you to write a couple of new books." And so these are on more video game design related topics, or game design related topics. So this is going to give me some time to work on those as well. So I'll
Mm.
be writing books. I'll be designing games. I'll be, hopefully taking a little contract work here and there. And to be honest, I'm very excited about it. I'm looking forward to kind of taking a break from a full-time job and concentrating on things that are even more important to me.
Ah, well, I'm really happy to hear that. I was a bit, I guess because I was a bit anxious when I heard the recent news. When I read it, I was like, oh no, I hope it's not right. But of course, now that I know your background, I see it's no problem at all, really, all things considered.
Well, it helps that I have a lot of friends and a lot of people that are connected, and I have some
Yeah,
pretty good credits on my resume, so that never
exactly.
hurt.
Yeah, it it is good to hear. I do wish I do hope I'll get to go to Gen Con one day.
Yeah, you should. I think every board gamer should go at least once in their life.
Absolutely, it's like the mecca for board games and RPGs, I think. Though,
Yeah,
of course, if
yeah.
you're in LA, it's a lot easier to go there than if you live in the boondocks of
Oh no,
Quebec.
not at all. That's what kept me from going for many years. Is it's all the way out in Illinois, and that's a far trip, right? That's a not inexpensive. It's not inexpensive, and now the big hurdle for Gen Con is now actually housing.
Oh yeah.
I think they've kind of outgrown their location in the fact that the housing sells out literally in seconds.
Oh
I'm
jeez, right.
I was really lucky because another friend, my friend Tate that I mentioned earlier, he had a room, and I mentioned to him, hey, I really need to go to the show, and he said, well, I'm looking for a roommate, and I said, great, let's
Yeah.
room up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I got really lucky this time around, and
Mm,
it's tough. I'd say
oh
that
yeah.
if you have friends in the area, see if you can like crash on their couch or something
Yeah.
to go to get to the show. Do what
Yeah.
you can to get there.
Yeah. I suppose at some point you do get a bit too let's say a bit too old behind the ears to do the old sharing one sharing one room with 8 different people, with two of them sleeping in the
Yeah,
bath. You know.
I'm a little too old to sleep on the floor or in a bathtub these days, but
Yeah.
I don't mind. Worst comes to worst, I'll sleep on a rollout or a couch or something. If it's for a night. But yeah, you get to a point where you're like, you gotta. There's certain things you have to. You just have to do. You have to do right for yourself, and that for me,
Yeah.
that's a bed and meals. Right? You got to make sure you eat some good meals, not just junk the whole time, and get a good amount of sleep because those shows are exhausting and they're
Yeah.
they're they're a lot of work. Just even to attend it for fun, they're a lot of work, but they're fantastic. I highly recommend going. Or if you can't make it to a Gen Con, at least get to a PAX or get to a Origins or get to if you're in Europe, get to the Spiel or something. Right? There's so many
Oh yeah.
big shows still over the course of the year that you can go to, or
Absolutely.
a board game geek show or a dice tower show.
Yeah. Or
You know?
at least at minimum a local convention or something like that.
Right? Exactly. Yeah.
There's one in my area, which is nice. Very grateful
Yeah,
for
or
that.
or even start one yourself if there isn't one in your area, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's not that hard to set up a Facebook group here, tables
Sure.
and chairs and extra, and
Yeah, you rent out a room at a hotel and you make sure that there's some food nearby and you bring some board games and boom, you've got a mini convention.
yeah, it's not completely impossible to do. Maybe contact an LGS to set up a booth, and
Exactly. If any other people can do it, so can you.
exactly, it's not. It takes a lot of work, but it's not impossible, all things considered.
Yep. Like I said, you just have to want it.
Mm. So, one questions I wanted to ask you. It's one of the last ones, I swear. Uh, I wanted to know, since you have had such a big uh, history, what were some of the bigger challenges that you faced during your career? Some bigger
Hmm.
challenges.
Bigger challenges. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Well, in the video game industry, I think a big challenge, and this is for everybody who works in video games, is that the technology and methods of making games change very quickly and frequently.
Ah, that's fair.
Um, the number of programs that I've had to learn, and the number of you know, everything from, like, you know, when I started making video games, we were doing 16-bit pixel art on proprietary software for emulators on, you know, Nintendo and SNES and Genesis and Jaguar and things like that.
That's a little
Um,
bit.
yeah, yeah, Jaguar, ugh, stinker. Anyway,
Oh yeah.
and then recently, you know, in the industry at the company that I was last at, we were making, you know, games in Unity, and you know, the team was, you know, they were writing code in, I think were they using Lua, I think, maybe, or Python maybe, or, and you know, things were being built in Maya, and you know, it's a totally different set of tools from it. There's no continuity in the hardware and the tools over the years. It's not like the film industry, where the film industry has mostly, I mean, video, there's a little bit of a, you know, learning curve and stuff like that, but the basic way that you go about shooting a movie or TV show has not changed too much
Yeah.
over the last, what, 100 years or so. But
Yeah. I mean,
in
yeah.
the, I was going to say, in the 50, 60 years that video games have been made, it's radical shifts, huge shifts in
Yeah.
technology. But the good news is this: as a game designer, the foundation of the things that I know apply. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what kind of hardware. Doesn't matter what kind of tools you're using. Good games are good games, and you can apply that knowledge. That doesn't matter if I'm making a mobile game or a MMO or a board game or an ARG or a game for a theme park, which are all things that I've done. I still can use those skills and that knowledge, and they're all applicable.
Oh yeah. Can I ask what the ARG was? I'm a bit curious.
Oh, like an alternate reality game.
Yeah. What was it? I'm curious.
Oh, these were games that I did when I worked for Disney.
Oh.
We did. They're kind of like a little bit like LARPing, a little bit like,
Yeah. Yeah. I know what
you know,
ARGs are.
yeah,
Disney. Nah.
yeah. I worked on one in particular called The Legends of Frontierland, and we turned the park. There's a land in Disneyland and Disney World called Frontierland.
Right.
That's, you know, Wild West themed,
Yep.
and we turned the whole land into essentially a kind of a competitive land, like an area control game.
Right.
And
Right.
so
So that
and
kind
so
of
people,
ARG. Right.
yeah, and so people would show up, and we'd say, hey, you know, welcome to Rainbow Ridge, I think was one of the towns, and we'd say we're looking for people to help us with this against those dirty, you know, frontierland folk. They're trying to take our land, and they'd be like, okay, what can I do to help? And we're like, all right, well, go do this, and go talk to this guy, and go play poker with this guy, or go get this guy and put him in jail, or whatever. Go pet this goat. You know, there were all these things that we'd have them do, and they'd run all over Disneyland and do all these things, and they had a great time, and people started to show up in cowboy clothing and
Oh,
really insert themselves and role play, and
that's
it was
nice.
fantastic. It was such a great experience. But Disneyland was like, well, we don't really want people role playing at Disneyland. We just would rather them buy stuff and watch stuff and ride stuff. And
Ah,
so
that's a
so
shame.
the guys that came up with the idea, they took it to Knott's Berry Farm, and so they're doing it over at Knott's Berry Farm.
Ah, well,
So
the happy ending. Not the kind of ARG I was thinking of, but that's a nice and wholesome thing. Either way.
yeah, yeah, it was a good time.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. So this is mainly all the questions I had. So thanks a lot for the very developed questions. I really appreciated it.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for asking. It's always a pleasure to talk about games,
Oh
and
yeah,
I hope that your audience really gets something from it.
I do hope so. Uh, as I said, the audience isn't really much yet, but you know I'm working on that.
Don't worry, they'll get there. And if you put these up on YouTube, which I know you have been doing,
Oh yeah,
hopefully then people will start to dip back into the back catalog. So hello from the past to the people in the future.
exactly. All right, I'm just gonna check real quick if we have any questions. That doesn't seem to be the case. I was expecting it. So, thanks a lot, everybody, for sitting on the designer's board chair once again. I'll see you on the next podcast. I really hope you enjoyed it. And thanks a lot once again to Scott Rogers for being here. In the description, you'll find his blog spot and his Twitter. Is there any other place people can reach you?
Yeah, you can reach me on Facebook. Just look for Scott Rogers. Check out my board. If you're into board games, check out my 3 published games, which are Ray Guns and Rocket Ships by IADW Games, Pantone the Game, which is a party game by Cryptozoic Entertainment, and my most recent release, which is Alien: Fate of the Nostromo. That's published by Ravensburger. Or you can dip back into my back catalog of video games, and play stuff like God of War or Maximo or Darksiders, things like that. Or check out my board game books or level design books. Level Up: The Guide to Great Video Game Design, and Swipe This: The Guide to Great Touchscreen Game Design. Those are both on Amazon. And make sure, or you can see me on Twitter and Instagram under Mighty Bedbug. Yeah, just more all types of great stuff coming up in the future. So just if you're into games or want to know more about how to make games, just hit me up and say hi and tell me you saw me here on the designer's board chair.
Yes, exactly. So thanks a lot, everybody.